He helped a poor deaf woman every morning, not because he believed in miracles or destiny, but because kindness was cheaper than guilt and easier than explaining cruelty to his 8-year-old son. And every day before the sun fully rose over the tired buildings of Brookdale Street, Daniel Carter would wake up, pack 2 lunches instead of 1, straighten the loose tie that still smelled faintly of yesterday's coffee, and walk hand in hand with his son Noah toward the bus stop where the world always felt heavier and quieter at the same time. And it was there, near the cracked bench with rusted bolts and a fading advertisement for a phone company, that he first noticed her, the deaf woman with the worn brown coat, the frayed scarf, and the eyes that carried an old, patient sadness, standing slightly apart from everyone else, holding a cardboard sign that never begged loudly but simply read in uneven handwriting, "Deaf. Hungry. Thank you." And Daniel remembered how on that first morning he hesitated, because he was already late, because his paycheck barely survived the month, because helping strangers felt like a luxury meant for people with fuller wallets and emptier worries. But then Noah tugged at his hand and whispered, "Dad, she looks cold." And that was how it began, with a quiet nod, a shy smile, and half of Daniel's breakfast sandwich placed gently into her trembling hands, her fingers brushing his for a second, her lips forming a silent thank you that he somehow understood without sound. And from that day on, it became routine, a small ritual carved into the rhythm of survival, Daniel bringing extra food, sometimes a coffee he couldn't really afford, sometimes a clean pair of gloves, sometimes just a moment of eye contact and respect, and the woman, whose name he later learned through careful gestures and a small notepad was Elena, would smile with her whole face, tapping her chest and bowing slightly as if he were doing something heroic instead of simply choosing not to look away. And Daniel never told anyone about it, not his coworkers at the warehouse, not the other parents at Noah's school, because kindness loses something when it's announced, and besides, he didn't see himself as a savior, just a single father doing what he hoped someone would do for his own child if life ever broke him the way it had broken her. Because Daniel knew what loss felt like, he knew it intimately, ever since the night his wife Lily died in a rain-slicked intersection when a drunk driver ignored a red light, leaving Daniel with a funeral bill, a screaming toddler, and a silence in the house that never truly went away. And so he worked harder, slept less, and learned how to braid hair, how to pack lunches shaped like dinosaurs, how to answer questions about heaven without crying, and how to keep going even when grief sat on his chest like a weight that refused to move. And maybe that was why Elena's quiet suffering spoke to him so deeply, because it didn't ask for pity, it simply existed, day after day, rain or shine, a reminder that pain didn't always shout, sometimes it just waited. And weeks turned into months, seasons changed, and Daniel noticed small details about Elena. The way she always stood facing the street to read vibrations, the way she carefully folded every bill she received, the way her eyes softened whenever Noah waved at her enthusiastically, making exaggerated gestures just to make her laugh, and Elena would laugh silently, shoulders shaking, joy radiating without sound. And sometimes Daniel wondered about her story, how she ended up there, whether she had family, whether someone was looking for her, but he never pried, because respect meant allowing someone to keep their scars private, and life continued in its exhausting loop. Until one ordinary morning shattered the fragile simplicity of it all, because that day the street felt different, heavier, charged, and Daniel noticed it even before he saw them. The low hum of engines, the unnatural stillness of the crowd, the way conversations died mid-sentence, as 4 black SUVs rolled to a smooth stop near the bus stop, polished and imposing, reflecting the confused faces of onlookers, and 4 men in dark suits stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the unmistakable posture of bodyguards, scanning the area with practiced precision, and people whispered, stepped back, clutched their bags, and Daniel felt Noah squeeze his hand tighter, fear flickering across his young face. And then another man emerged from the lead vehicle, older, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, carrying a leather briefcase and an expression of controlled urgency. And without hesitation, without looking at anyone else, he walked straight toward Elena, who stood frozen, eyes wide, breath shallow, her hands beginning to shake, and for a terrifying second Daniel thought she was in danger, that someone had come to hurt her, to remove her from the only place that had become familiar, and instinctively, without thinking, he stepped forward, placing himself slightly between Elena and the approaching man, his voice steady but firm as he said, "Is there a problem?" And the man stopped, surprised, then studied Daniel with a look that held no anger, only assessment, before glancing back at Elena, whose eyes had filled with tears, and slowly, deliberately, the man raised his hands in a calming gesture, opened his briefcase, and pulled out a folder thick with documents, photographs, and seals. Then he spoke clearly, carefully, as if every word mattered. "My name is Richard Hale. I am her lawyer," and a murmur rippled through the crowd, disbelief hanging in the air like fog, and Richard continued, his gaze returning to Elena with something close to reverence. "We've been looking for her for a very long time," and Elena's knees buckled as the reality crashed over her, memories surfacing, pain reopening, and Daniel caught her instinctively, supporting her weight as she sobbed silently, and it was in that moment that Daniel learned the truth, not through dramatic speeches but through fragments, notes written with trembling hands, explanations given patiently as Elena tried to process a past she had buried to survive, because Elena was not just a poor deaf woman, she was the sole heir to a vast estate, the daughter of a powerful businessman who had died years earlier, leaving behind a fortune tied up in legal battles, corporate enemies, and relatives who saw her disability as a weakness to exploit. And when threats escalated, when attempts were made to control her, to institutionalize her, to silence her permanently, Elena had fled, disappearing completely, choosing the uncertainty of the streets over the certainty of being imprisoned in a golden cage. And for years she lived invisibly, trusting no one, hiding in plain sight, until the law finally caught up with the lies, until evidence surfaced, until Richard Hale, bound by both duty and guilt for failing to protect her sooner, tracked her down at last. And as the crowd watched in stunned silence, Elena clutched Daniel's sleeve, her fingers digging in as if afraid he might vanish too, and she wrote on the notepad with frantic urgency, "I don't want to go if he can't come," pointing at Daniel, and Richard paused, reading the words, then looked at Daniel again, really looked at him this time, taking in the worn shoes, the tired eyes, the protective way he held his son close, and something shifted in his expression, something softened, and he nodded slowly, saying, "No one is forcing you. But it's time. You were safe." And Elena looked at Daniel, tears streaming, gratitude and fear colliding in her gaze. And Daniel felt his chest tighten, because he knew this was goodbye, because kindness was never meant to chain someone to suffering, it was meant to lead them out of it. And with shaking hands, Elena hugged him, a deep, fierce embrace that carried months of unspoken thanks. And she hugged Noah too, pressing her forehead to his, and Noah whispered, "Be happy," like it was the simplest instruction in the world. And then, with one last look back, Elena walked toward the waiting cars, toward a life she had been denied for so long. And the SUVs drove away, taking with them the mystery, the wealth, the guards, the lawyer, leaving behind an ordinary street and an ordinary man who suddenly felt very small and very proud at the same time. And days passed, and life returned to its routine, but something was missing. And Daniel found himself staring at the empty spot near the bench, wondering if kindness ever truly disappeared or if it simply transformed. And then one afternoon, weeks later, a letter arrived at Daniel's apartment, sealed, heavy, official, and inside was a handwritten note from Elena, thanking him not for the food or the money, but for seeing her when the world chose not to, for treating her like a human being instead of a problem. And enclosed was a document establishing a trust fund for Noah's education and Daniel's financial security, enough to lift the constant fear of bills and broken cars and late rent, enough to breathe. And Daniel cried then, quietly, because it wasn't about the money, it was about the proof that goodness echoed, that small acts mattered, that raising his son to choose compassion over comfort had changed more than one life. And years later, when Noah would ask about the woman at the bus stop, Daniel would smile and say, "She reminded me who we are," and in that truth, simple and unpolished, lived the real miracle. Not the lawyer, not the bodyguards, not the fortune, but the fact that one tired single dad chose kindness every morning, and in doing so, altered the course of destiny without ever knowing he was standing at the center of it.